Can I borrow you tonight, as my wife? The question floated through the grand marble foyer with such quiet certainty that even the ticking grandfather clock seemed to hesitate. Ava Brooks froze with a vase of fresh white lilies in her hands, convinced she had misunderstood the man standing only a few feet away. Vincent Moretti never repeated himself. At 41, he had built a reputation that reached far beyond Manhattan's skyline, not because he raised his voice, but because he never needed to. Every room seemed to adjust itself the moment he entered. Every conversation softened. Every eye instinctively followed him. Yet now, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo with a silver watch catching the fading afternoon light, he looked less like the city's most influential businessman and more like a man whose carefully ordered world had suddenly slipped beyond his control. Ava blinked, searching his face for the smallest hint that this was some elaborate joke. She found none. Outside the towering windows, black SUVs rolled across the circular driveway while staff hurried between flower arrangements, catering deliveries, and security checkpoints. The annual Moretti Foundation Gala would begin in less than 45 minutes, welcoming senators, philanthropists, CEOs, and celebrities beneath the crystal chandeliers of the estate. It was the single most important evening on Vincent's calendar, an event watched by everyone who mattered. "I'm sorry, sir," Ava finally whispered, clutching the vase a little tighter. "I don't think I heard you correctly." Vincent stepped closer, though he maintained the respectful distance that had always defined every interaction between them. His expression remained composed, but there was an unfamiliar trace of urgency behind his calm gray eyes. "You heard me correctly." Ava's heartbeat quickened. She had worked inside the mansion for nearly 3 years. She knew exactly how every room should look before guests arrived, how Vincent preferred his morning coffee, which antique piano required the softest polish, and even how the sunlight entered the east hallway during autumn afternoons. She knew everything about maintaining his home, yet almost nothing about the man himself. He was courteous. He always thanked the staff. He remembered birthdays. He asked about people's families. But beyond those quiet gestures, Vincent Moretti remained an impossible mystery. "My fiancée left 20 minutes ago," he said evenly. "She won't be coming back." Ava stared at him, unsure whether to offer sympathy or silence. Rumors occasionally drifted through the servants' hallways about political alliances, powerful families, and carefully arranged engagements, but no one dared repeat them where Vincent might hear. He never encouraged gossip, and neither did his employees. "I'm sorry," Ava said sincerely. Vincent gave a small nod. "So am I." The honesty in those 3 words surprised her more than the request itself. Before she could respond, the estate manager hurried across the foyer holding a tablet. "Mr. Moretti, the press has already begun arriving." Vincent acknowledged him with a brief glance before returning his attention to Ava. "Every guest expects me to arrive with my future wife." Ava looked down at the simple housekeeping uniform she still wore, then back toward the sweeping staircase decorated with thousands of white roses. "Sir, I'm your maid." "Tonight," Vincent replied quietly, "I need someone I can trust." The sentence settled into the silence between them. Not someone impressive, not someone famous, not someone wealthy, someone he trusted. Ava had never imagined those words would be spoken about her by a man whose life revolved around influence and appearances. "People will know," she answered carefully. "Some might." He offered the faintest smile. "Most won't. They only notice what they expect to see." Somewhere deeper inside the mansion, musicians began rehearsing a string quartet arrangement that drifted gently through the hallways. Staff members crossed the foyer carrying silver trays and floral centerpieces, while security personnel quietly confirmed final preparations through discreet earpieces. The entire estate moved like a perfectly synchronized machine, yet Vincent remained completely still, waiting for Ava's answer instead of ordering it. That alone told her how serious the situation truly was. "Why me?" she finally asked. Vincent looked directly into her eyes. "Because every person in this house respects you." Ava lowered her gaze, caught off guard by words she had never expected to hear. She had spent years believing her greatest achievement was becoming nearly invisible, quietly making every room brighter without drawing attention to herself. Now the most powerful man she had ever met was asking her to stand beside him where every camera would see her. He reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and removed a small velvet jewelry box. He opened it slowly, revealing an elegant diamond ring that sparkled beneath the chandelier lights. It was only a prop for the evening, yet seeing it made the impossible request suddenly feel terrifyingly real. Vincent held the box without moving closer. "No pressure," he said with unmistakable sincerity. "If you say no, I'll respect your decision." Ava looked from the ring to his steady expression, then toward the enormous front doors where the first flashes of photographers' cameras reflected through the glass. 45 minutes earlier, she had been arranging flowers. Now the next decision she made could change the course of both their lives forever. Ava slowly closed the velvet ring box without touching the diamond inside, then took a quiet breath that seemed far too small for the decision waiting before her. She looked at Vincent with uncertainty still lingering in her eyes. "If I do this," she said softly, "I will probably make mistakes." Vincent answered with the calm confidence that had reassured countless people over the years. "Then we will make them together." For the first time since the conversation began, Ava allowed herself the smallest smile. It disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived, replaced by nervous determination. "All right," she whispered. "I will help you." The estate manager immediately excused himself to organize the next steps, while Vincent simply nodded with genuine appreciation. There was no celebration, no dramatic reaction, only visible relief crossing his composed expression. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "That is more than I expected." Within minutes, the quiet servant corridors transformed into a whirlwind of careful preparation. A professional stylist, a tailor, and a makeup artist who had already been hired for the gala arrived with remarkable efficiency, but Vincent stopped them before they began. "Nothing extravagant," he instructed. "She should still look like herself." Those simple words surprised everyone in the room, especially Ava. She had expected to become someone completely different for the evening, someone polished into an unfamiliar image. Instead, the stylist selected an elegant navy blue evening gown with clean lines and timeless simplicity. Her natural curls were carefully arranged rather than hidden, and her makeup remained soft enough that the warm kindness in her face never disappeared beneath layers of cosmetics. When she finally looked into the full-length mirror, she hardly recognized herself, not because she looked like another person, but because she had never imagined seeing herself treated with such quiet respect. Meanwhile, Vincent waited outside the dressing room, reviewing schedules with his security director and politely declining repeated calls from concerned business associates. Every few minutes another notification appeared on his phone, yet he ignored them all. His attention remained fixed on one responsibility, now standing only a few feet away. When Ava stepped into the hallway, the conversations around them naturally faded. Staff members who had worked beside her for years smiled with genuine admiration. No one applauded. No one exaggerated the moment. They simply looked proud to see someone they respected being seen differently for the first time. Vincent turned toward her and paused for several seconds. His expression never became theatrical, but there was unmistakable warmth in his eyes. "You look exactly like yourself," he said. "That is precisely what I hoped for." Ava laughed nervously. "I have never worn shoes like these before. They only need to carry you through one evening," Vincent replied with an encouraging smile. Before leaving, he offered his arm instead of taking her hand, allowing her to choose the distance between them. After a brief hesitation, Ava gently rested her hand on his sleeve. They walked together through the quiet hallway toward the grand entrance as the first flashes from photographers illuminated the glass doors ahead. Outside, the waiting crowd believed they were about to witness another glamorous arrival. Neither of them realized they were stepping into a story that would soon become impossible for New York society to forget. The moment the mansion doors opened, a wave of warm light spilled onto the front steps as dozens of cameras turned toward Vincent and Ava together. Reporters called Vincent's name with practiced enthusiasm, while photographers captured every graceful step they took across the polished stone entrance. Ava kept her breathing steady, remembering everything the etiquette coach had quietly explained only minutes earlier. Stand tall, walk naturally, smile when it feels genuine. She repeated those thoughts in silence as flashes reflected against the elegant navy gown that still felt unfamiliar around her shoulders. Vincent matched his pace to hers without saying a word, making certain she never felt rushed. Inside the ballroom, the sound of a live string quartet floated beneath magnificent crystal chandeliers, and conversations drifted through the air like gentle waves. The annual gala had gathered some of the most recognizable names in business, philanthropy, and public service, all dressed in impeccable evening attire. For a brief moment, the room continued exactly as expected. Then someone noticed the woman standing beside Vincent Moretti. One conversation stopped. Another followed. Within seconds, whispers traveled across the ballroom faster than the servers carrying silver trays of sparkling water. Guests discreetly glanced toward the entrance, trying to recognize the woman they had never seen before. Some smiled politely. Others exchanged puzzled looks. A few quietly searched their memories, convinced they must have overlooked the announcement of Vincent's engagement to someone outside their social circles. Ava could feel hundreds of curious eyes studying every movement she made. She resisted the temptation to lower her head. Instead, she remembered Vincent's words. They only notice what they expect to see. She lifted her chin just enough to meet the room with quiet confidence. Vincent greeted longtime friends with calm professionalism, introducing Ava simply by her first name and never once speaking as though she needed explanation or apology. His steady tone subtly discouraged unnecessary questions, yet curiosity continued growing with every introduction. Near one of the grand windows overlooking the illuminated gardens, two elegantly dressed women exchanged whispers that were quiet enough to appear private but loud enough to reach nearby ears. One commented that Vincent had always been impossible to predict. The other wondered whether this mysterious young woman truly belonged in a room filled with influential families whose names had appeared in newspapers for generations. Ava heard every word, although neither woman looked directly at her. She kept her expression gentle, refusing to allow embarrassment to replace her dignity. Vincent noticed the brief hesitation in her steps. Without interrupting the conversations around them, he simply slowed his pace and asked softly, "Are you all right?" Ava offered a small nod. "I am learning." His faint smile returned. "So is everyone else." The answer surprised her enough to ease the tightness in her chest. Across the ballroom, more guests continued watching them. Some appeared skeptical. Others seemed quietly impressed by Vincent's calm certainty. No matter what assumptions filled the room, he never released her from his side, never hurried ahead, and never treated her like someone who had wandered into the wrong place. For the first time since entering the gala, Ava realized the evening was no longer about pretending to belong. It was about discovering whether she could believe she belonged at all. And somewhere among the countless conversations unfolding beneath the glittering chandeliers, one unexpected encounter was already making its way toward them, carrying a question that neither Vincent nor Ava had prepared to answer. The distinguished woman approaching them carried herself with the effortless confidence that came from decades of moving through rooms. Exactly like this one. Her silver evening gown shimmered beneath the chandeliers, and conversations seemed to pause wherever she walked. Ava recognized her immediately from magazine covers displayed in grocery store checkout lines. Eleanor Whitmore was known throughout New York as one of the city's most influential philanthropists, a woman whose opinion quietly shaped charitable foundations, museum boards, and business circles alike. She stopped in front of Vincent with a gracious smile before allowing her curious gaze to settle on Ava. "Vincent," she said warmly, "I was beginning to think you intended to surprise all of us this evening." Vincent smiled politely. "Apparently I succeeded." Eleanor laughed softly before extending her hand toward Ava. "It is a pleasure to finally meet the remarkable woman everyone has spent the last 10 minutes discussing." Ava accepted the greeting with steady composure. "The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Whitmore." Eleanor studied her for only a moment before smiling again. "Please call me Eleanor." The brief exchange seemed ordinary, yet nearby guests watched with careful attention. If Eleanor accepted this mysterious young woman without hesitation, many others would follow her example. Before another conversation could begin, a well-dressed businessman joined the small circle with an amused expression. "Vincent," he said with a light laugh, "you certainly know how to keep secrets. We have all been trying to figure out where you found someone who appeared out of nowhere." The remark sounded harmless on the surface, but the curious silence that followed revealed everyone wanted the answer. Vincent remained completely relaxed. "She did not appear out of nowhere," he answered calmly. "She has been living an honorable life long before any of us happened to meet her." The businessman nodded awkwardly, realizing Vincent had redirected the conversation without embarrassing anyone. Ava noticed several guests quietly exchanging thoughtful looks. Vincent had answered the question without revealing anything about her position in the household, yet he had also refused to let anyone reduce her to an object of curiosity. As servers passed with trays of sparkling cider and elegant hors d'oeuvres, the evening gradually regained its rhythm. Musicians continued performing while conversations shifted toward the charitable projects being celebrated. Vincent introduced Ava to community leaders, nonprofit directors, educators, and physicians, speaking to each person with the same respectful tone he used with governors and chief executives. Never once did he step ahead of her or leave her standing alone. Every introduction quietly communicated the same message. She belonged beside him because he had chosen to stand beside her. During a brief pause near the ballroom terrace, Ava looked toward the gardens glowing beneath thousands of white lights. "Thank you," she said quietly. Vincent glanced at her with gentle curiosity. "For what?" She smiled almost shyly. "For making this feel less frightening than I imagined." He looked toward the guests filling the ballroom before answering. People often mistake confidence for perfection. The truth is that confidence usually begins when someone knows they will not face a difficult room alone. Those words settled gently in Ava's heart. They were not rehearsed. They were not spoken for appearances. They were simply honest. For the first time since accepting his unexpected request, she stopped thinking about pretending to be someone else. Instead, she began wondering who Vincent Moretti truly was when the cameras stopped flashing and the ballroom finally grew quiet. She did not realize that before the evening ended, she would discover the reason he had trusted her above everyone else in his carefully guarded world. As the evening settled into an easy rhythm, the formal speeches gave way to quieter conversations, allowing the ballroom to breathe beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Vincent politely excused himself from a circle of donors and led Ava through a pair of open French doors onto the terrace overlooking the gardens. Cool autumn air replaced the warmth of the ballroom, carrying the faint scent of fresh roses and trimmed cedar hedges. For the first time that evening, there were no cameras following them and no curious faces studying every step they took. They stood beside the stone railing in comfortable silence while the fountain below reflected hundreds of tiny white lights across the water. Ava rested her hands lightly on the railing and looked toward the peaceful gardens. "I still cannot believe I agreed to this," she admitted with a quiet laugh. Vincent smiled gently. "Neither can I." His honesty made her smile grow a little wider. She glanced at him. "You seem calmer than I expected." He looked across the gardens before answering. "I learned a long time ago that panic only makes difficult moments more difficult." Ava nodded slowly. "Is that how you handle everything?" He considered the question for a moment. "Not everything. Some decisions stay with you much longer than others." She sensed there was more behind those words, but did not press him. Instead, she waited, and after another moment Vincent spoke again. "My engagement was never about love." Ava turned toward him with quiet surprise. His expression remained calm, yet there was a weight behind his eyes that had not been there earlier. It was arranged years ago because two influential families believed it would strengthen important relationships. Everyone assumed it was the practical choice. He paused before continuing. "I kept convincing myself that practicality was enough." Ava listened without interrupting. "Then why did it end today?" she asked softly. Vincent released a slow breath. "Because she finally admitted something I should have understood much sooner. Neither of us wanted the life everyone else had planned." The words carried no bitterness, only acceptance. Ava lowered her eyes for a moment. "That must have been difficult." "It was," he answered. "But pretending forever would have been even harder." The sentence lingered between them, carrying a meaning that reached far beyond the broken engagement. Ava realized he was not only speaking about himself. He was speaking about every expectation that forced people into roles they never truly chose. She smiled thoughtfully. "So tonight we are both pretending." Vincent looked at her and quietly shook his head. "Only part of tonight is pretend." Ava frowned slightly, unsure what he meant. He continued, with the same calm sincerity that had surprised her throughout the evening. "You are pretending to be my wife. But your kindness, your patience, and the way you treat every person in this house have never been an act. That is why I trusted you." Ava felt an unexpected warmth rise to her cheeks. No expensive compliment she had ever overheard inside the mansion compared to those simple words. Before she could answer, music drifted through the open terrace doors as guests applauded the beginning of the charity auction. Vincent offered his arm once again with quiet courtesy. "We should go back." Ava gently rested her hand on his sleeve, but this time the movement felt natural instead of uncertain. As they stepped back into the ballroom together, neither of them noticed several guests watching from across the room, quietly exchanging curious glances as whispers began spreading once again, carrying a rumor that would follow them long after the gala came to an end. By the time the charity auction concluded, the atmosphere inside the ballroom had subtly changed. The polite curiosity that had greeted Vincent and Ava earlier had grown into something much larger. Conversations paused whenever they passed. Guests smiled warmly to their faces, yet quiet speculation traveled from table to table with remarkable speed. No one openly questioned Vincent's choices, but everyone wanted to understand how the city's most private businessman had appeared beside a woman no one seemed to know. As musicians transitioned into softer melodies and dessert was served beneath the sparkling chandeliers, discreet notifications began appearing on guests' phones. A photograph taken outside the mansion had already reached social media. The image showed Vincent offering his arm to Ava as they entered the gala together. Within minutes, countless comments began asking the same question. Had Vincent Moretti secretly married? Was this the woman who had quietly changed the future of one of New York's most influential families? Ava noticed several younger guests glancing between their phones and her face before quickly looking away with embarrassed smiles. She leaned slightly toward Vincent. "People are talking," he answered with calm honesty. "People always talk when they do not know the whole story." "Does it bother you?" she asked. He looked around the ballroom before replying. "Only when rumors become more important than people." Those words lingered with Ava as another familiar face approached them. Eleanor Whitmore returned carrying 2 glasses of sparkling cider, offering one to each of them with her characteristic warmth. "Congratulations," she said with a knowing smile. Ava hesitated, unsure how to respond. Vincent accepted the glass graciously. "For what exactly?" Eleanor smiled. "For reminding everyone tonight that character cannot be measured by a family name or a guest list." She glanced towards several nearby conversations before continuing. "Whether the rumors are true or not is almost irrelevant now. The room has spent the evening watching how you treat one another, and that speaks much louder than gossip." After she walked away, Ava quietly reflected on those words. She had entered the mansion ballroom terrified that someone might discover she worked there. Instead, the people who mattered most seemed less interested in where she came from than in the quiet respect Vincent had consistently shown her throughout the evening. Across the ballroom, however, not everyone welcomed the growing admiration. Several influential guests exchanged thoughtful expressions while discussing canceled business expectations, postponed introductions, and the engagement everyone had once assumed would strengthen powerful partnerships. No one confronted Vincent directly, yet Ava sensed invisible pieces moving across a much larger board she could not fully see. She realized this evening had consequences reaching far beyond elegant dinners and newspaper headlines. Vincent noticed her thoughtful expression. "You are wondering what happens tomorrow." She smiled faintly. "Is it that obvious?" "Only because I have been asking myself the same question." Before she could answer, Vincent's longtime chief of staff quietly approached and handed him a tablet displaying dozens of news alerts. Every headline featured the same photograph from earlier that evening. Vincent glanced at the screen for only a moment before locking it and placing it aside without concern. Ava looked at him with surprise. "You are not going to read them?" He gently shook his head. "I would rather pay attention to the person standing beside me than to strangers writing stories about us." Ava lowered her eyes, unable to hide the warmth spreading across her face. Somewhere between the grand entrance and this quiet conversation, the evening had stopped feeling like a performance. Neither of them was ready to admit how much had changed, but as the final guests began preparing to leave the gala, both quietly understood that the most important conversation between them had not happened yet. The final guests lingered beneath the glowing chandeliers long after the formal program had ended, reluctant to leave an evening that had become far more memorable than anyone had expected. Small groups gathered near the ballroom doors, speaking in careful voices while glancing toward Vincent and Ava with quiet curiosity. The rumors had already traveled beyond the mansion walls, but inside the estate something more meaningful had begun to unfold. People were no longer discussing only the unexpected appearance of Vincent's mysterious companion. They were talking about the remarkable respect he had shown her from the moment they arrived. Near the entrance hall, several influential business leaders approached Vincent one final time before departing. One of them smiled politely and said, "I hope we will have the opportunity to meet your wife again very soon." Before Vincent could answer, another guest added with genuine warmth, "She has brought a different side of you into this room tonight." Vincent glanced at Ava before responding. "She has reminded me of a few things that matter." His answer was brief, but it carried enough sincerity that no one questioned it. As the conversation slowly faded, Ava noticed members of the household staff quietly watching from a respectful distance. Some had worked for the Moretti family for decades. They smiled when their eyes met hers, and for the first time she did not feel like someone standing between two different worlds. She simply felt seen. While Vincent paused to thank volunteers who had organized the charity auction, Ava wandered toward a display highlighting scholarships funded by the Moretti Foundation. Framed photographs showed students graduating from colleges, families receiving housing assistance, and neighborhood libraries opening after years of planning. She studied every picture carefully until a familiar voice spoke beside her. Eleanor Whitmore had returned once again. "Beautiful, are they not?" Ava nodded. "They are. I never realized how many lives this foundation has touched." Eleanor smiled gently. "Most people notice the headlines. Very few notice the quiet work behind them." She looked toward Vincent, who was patiently speaking with a maintenance employee rather than an executive. "That is why tonight has surprised so many people. They expected power. They witnessed character." Ava remained silent, reflecting on those words. Eleanor placed a reassuring hand over her own and continued, "Never underestimate the influence of quiet dignity. Rooms like this remember it much longer than wealth." Before Ava could respond, Vincent approached them with the relaxed expression of someone whose responsibilities had finally eased. Eleanor excused herself, leaving the two of them alone near the scholarship display. Vincent noticed Ava studying one photograph of a young woman receiving her college diploma. "My mother insisted that every scholarship include first-generation college students," he explained. "She believed opportunity should always travel farther than privilege." Ava looked at him with thoughtful admiration. "She sounds like someone I would have loved to meet." Vincent smiled softly. "You remind me of her more than you probably realize." Ava lowered her eyes, touched by the unexpected comparison. They began walking slowly through the now nearly empty ballroom, where staff quietly collected floral arrangements and folded linens. Without the crowds, the mansion felt peaceful again, almost unchanged from the quiet mornings Ava knew so well. Yet everything felt different. The distance that had once existed between employer and employee had gradually given way to something built on honesty, trust, and mutual respect. As they reached the grand staircase, Vincent paused before speaking. "Tomorrow there will be questions from reporters, business partners, and probably people neither of us has ever met." Ava looked at him calmly. "And what will you tell them?" Vincent held her gaze for a long moment before answering with complete certainty. "Only the truth that matters." The meaning behind those words stayed with Ava all the way home, because for the first time she realized the next chapter of their story would not be written by gossip, expectations, or powerful families. It would be written by the choice they were both quietly preparing to make. The following afternoon, the mansion felt unusually quiet after the excitement of the gala, yet the outside world had become louder than ever. News outlets continued sharing photographs from the previous evening, while television commentators and online publications debated the identity of the woman who had appeared beside Vincent Moretti. Every headline seemed determined to invent a different version of the story, but inside the estate the morning unfolded with familiar routines. Fresh coffee filled the kitchen, sunlight stretched across the marble floors, and gardeners carefully trimmed the hedges as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Ava returned to work wearing her usual housekeeping uniform, quietly arranging flowers in the entrance hall exactly as she had done countless mornings before. She hoped the familiar routine would steady her thoughts, yet every bouquet reminded her of the evening that had changed everything. As she reached for a crystal vase, she noticed Vincent entering the foyer dressed in a charcoal business suit, preparing to leave for an afternoon meeting. He paused when he saw her, offering the same respectful smile he had given her before the gala, as though nothing about their relationship had become complicated. "Good morning," he said. Ava smiled back. "Good morning." For a brief moment, neither of them spoke again. The silence felt comfortable rather than awkward, built on trust instead of uncertainty. Vincent glanced toward the fresh lilies she had just arranged. "They look beautiful." Ava laughed softly. "You probably say that every week." "Because every week they do." She shook her head with quiet amusement. "You always notice the little things." Vincent looked thoughtfully at the flowers before answering. "The little things usually tell the truth." His words lingered between them long after the conversation ended. Later that afternoon, after his meetings had concluded, Vincent found Ava sitting alone on a wooden bench overlooking the estate gardens. The autumn leaves had begun covering the walking paths with shades of gold and crimson, while the fountain reflected the warm colors of the setting sun. He carried 2 cups of hot coffee and quietly offered one to her. She accepted it with a grateful smile. They watched the peaceful gardens in silence until Vincent finally spoke. "I have spent the entire day answering questions." Ava looked toward him with gentle curiosity. "Did anyone ask about business?" He smiled faintly. "Almost everyone asked about you first." She looked down at her cup. "I am sorry if I created problems." Vincent immediately shook his head. "You did not create them. You simply revealed them." Ava frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He looked toward the distant trees before answering. "People expected me to make decisions based on influence, reputation, or convenience. Last night reminded me that I no longer want to live according to someone else's expectations." Ava remained quiet, sensing the importance of what he was about to say. Vincent took a slow breath before turning to face her completely. "When I asked you to stand beside me, I believed I was borrowing your kindness for one evening. Somewhere between the front entrance and the end of the gala, I realized I was hoping the night would never end." Ava felt her heart race, not because his words were dramatic, but because they were unmistakably sincere. Vincent smiled gently, his voice calm and steady. "This time I am not asking you to pretend. I simply want to know whether you would consider allowing us to discover what this could become without pretending to be anyone other than ourselves." Ava looked into his eyes for a long moment as the last rays of sunlight settled across the quiet garden, realizing that the most important choice of her life no longer belonged to a single unforgettable evening, but to every ordinary day that might follow. For several quiet moments, neither of them spoke. The only sounds came from the gentle fountain, the rustling autumn leaves, and distant birds settling into the trees as the afternoon slowly faded into evening. Ava held the warm coffee cup in both hands while looking across the gardens that had become so familiar during her years at the estate. She remembered the first morning she had arrived, hoping only for steady work and a chance to support her family with dignity. Never once had she imagined that the man sitting beside her would one day ask not for another favor, but for an honest opportunity to share a future. She finally turned toward Vincent with a peaceful smile. "I cannot promise that I know how to live in your world." Vincent answered without hesitation. "Then we will build one that belongs to both of us." His words carried no grand promises, only quiet conviction. That was what Ava trusted most. Over the following weeks, the rumors gradually lost their power. Newspapers found newer headlines to chase, television commentators moved on to different stories, and the endless online speculation slowly faded beneath the weight of everyday life. The people who truly knew Vincent noticed something much more meaningful than the gossip ever could. He smiled more often. He left the office earlier whenever possible. He spent more time walking through the foundation, speaking with employees by name, and visiting the community programs his mother had once championed. Ava continued working with the same humility that had always defined her, although Vincent insisted she no longer think of herself as someone standing quietly in the background. He invited her to planning meetings for the foundation, listened carefully to her ideas about neighborhood education programs, and discovered that her understanding of ordinary families often solved problems that expensive consultants had overlooked. Months later, on a bright winter morning after the season's first snowfall, Vincent asked Ava to meet him in the glass garden pavilion overlooking the frozen fountain. There were no reporters, no business leaders, and no elaborate celebration waiting inside. Fresh white lilies rested on a small wooden table beside 2 cups of hot coffee. just as they had shared on the afternoon that changed everything. Vincent smiled as Ava entered, carrying herself with the same quiet grace that had first earned his trust. He reached into his coat pocket and carefully removed a simple velvet box. "The first time I offered you a ring, it belonged to a story we were pretending to tell," he said softly. "Today I would like to ask a different question." He opened the box, revealing an elegant ring whose beauty came from its simplicity rather than extravagance. "Would you choose to spend your life with me? Not because anyone expects it, not because either of us needs to pretend, but because we have discovered that respect grows into something stronger than fear ever could." Tears gathered gently in Ava's eyes as she smiled through quiet happiness. "Yes," she whispered, "I choose you." Vincent placed the ring on her hand with the same care and respect that had marked every step of their journey together. In the months that followed, they celebrated a small wedding surrounded by family, close friends, foundation employees, and the household staff who had quietly witnessed the beginning of their remarkable story. Eleanor Whitmore attended with a warm smile, reminding everyone that true character always shines brighter than social status. The grand mansion remained beautiful, the gardens continued blooming with every new season, and life settled into a peaceful rhythm built on trust instead of appearances. Visitors who met them for the first time rarely asked how their story had begun. They simply noticed the way Vincent looked at Ava with genuine admiration and the way Ava spoke to every person she met with unwavering kindness. In the end, the evening that had started as a borrowed role became the beginning of a lasting promise, proving that the strongest relationships are never built on power or privilege, but on quiet respect freely given and faithfully returned. And on that day, everyone who knew their story remembered what true dignity looked like.